Revelation 12:11 says, "And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony." Welcome to the Word of Their Testimony podcast.
Amen.
Chad, I am so happy to have you in the studio today.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Sure.
I know it was like maybe a month or so ago. Yeah, it was about a month ago that we went on the beach trip with our friends.
Okay.
This will probably be later by the time this episode airs.
Sure.
But when we're recording, we went on that beach trip and you and me kind of sat by the fire and we were just talking about your story. And you're such a joyful person all the time. Like you're always full of joy and happiness. And it's just like it overpours into everyone that you're around. Like
That's very sweet.
It's contagious. And then, so I was so surprised to hear that you've been through so much in your life. You faced so much trauma and adversity and things, and you've come out of that just with such an amazing attitude and such a heart for the Lord and for friendship. And you just have an incredible attitude despite everything that you've been through. And I find that truly inspiring, and your story just really touched my heart. And so thank you for saying yes when I asked you to come on the podcast.
Yeah, no worries.
So I would just love to hand it over, and whatever the Holy Spirit's leading you to share, just go for it.
Well, I didn't grow up in a happy household. When I was a kid, my parents weren't believers, and I guess to go back even further, like they were both hippies, and they got married, and then they moved to a farm, and then I was born down there in West Virginia. I ended up growing up in Long Island, but I was born down there on that farm, and I had a little brother who was like a year and a half younger than me, and my father was just very violent towards me. So all throughout growing up, he was like hitting me with 2x4s, picking me up, throwing me down the stairs, choking me, like smashing my head into walls and stuff like that. And it just didn't make sense in one part. And the other thing is like, as a kid, you just don't know any better. I mean, you know that you don't really talk about those things. But a real blessing was that all of a sudden things changed. All of a sudden my father was acting kinder towards me, and he was acting kinder towards my mom. And so I had seen him be violent towards her. And then there were times where I stood up to him when I was like 4 years old to stop him from being violent towards her. Yeah. And then I got the full wrath when I was trying to stop him from hurting my mom. Yeah, but things were kind of different. And then he started reading the Chronicles of Narnia to me and my brother. And one night after he was like reading to my brother and I, he's like, "Hey, listen, I've done a lot of bad things in my life, and I learned about Jesus Christ that came, and he came into my heart and changed my life, and I don't know if you want that change too." And so I had literally seen the power of God to change his heart from being somebody who was violent and aggressive towards me and towards my mom, and to become more loving and kind. And so I was excited at that prospect, and I said yes. And so
how old were you?
That's when I was 5.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then he said, "Okay, all you have to do is, confess your sins, and you probably have less than me because you're 5.
Yeah.
And to give your life over to God." And, it's funny because I hear a lot of other Christians talk about if they, grew up with Christ when they were 5, and sometimes they don't really see that as a real decision. But for me, I was like, if God is powerful enough to change this violent, angry man into somebody who's more loving, then that's something that I want. I can see that he's real. And I think a byproduct of that, especially in talking to other believers and other people, is just, there seems to be a big correlation with a lot of people between their earthly father and their heavenly father, kind of in how people conceptualize that. Mm-hmm. For me, those two were always drastically different because I could see the difference from when my father was harsh and violent to when he was redeemed. The Bible talks about God making people a new creation. So I was able to see my father be this new creation. And so to me, the character of my father and the character of, God were always very different. So it was a very clear distinction to me when my father was acting out of his, new creation spirit versus, the old ways. Every once in a while, I would see shades of the old him come back, but I would definitely say that he had become a new creation. So, but I shared it and I talked to people about how God came in and he rescued me from that. And The Passion of the Christ was a popular movie, and I remember watching that, and there are lots of some of those violent scenes where I could really relate to kind of what Jesus was going through, the scenes where he was traumatized in there. And there was a certain sense of kinship, or a certain sense that I knew that Jesus kind of understood. So yeah, I shared that with everybody in the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship group. But afterwards, Amona, who was kind of one of the ones that helped me work through what to share and what not to share. So I talked with her afterwards just to kind of get her feedback and everything. And she was just like, oh yeah, that was great. She's like, have you talked to your parents about this? And I was like, oh, no. And so, I felt like it was great to be able to talk with people that, maybe they have had similar experiences of domestic abuse and domestic violence that I had. And I thought, maybe God could and somehow use that to reach out to people. So that's why I wanted to share, because a lot of times people don't share that. People didn't ask about that. Like I just said, oh, I grew up Christian. And then everybody's like, okay. And I think part of the joy that you talked about that I feel like God has really instilled in me, like a lot of that has to do with the fact that he rescued me, he saw me, and he pulled me out of a dark situation. And I don't know if this is a weird tangent, but I can't explain why God had reached out to me and to my family to have them become believers and not other people. I can't answer that. I don't know. All I can say is that I am thankful that God rescued me from that situation. But I took Amona's challenge seriously, and I was reading the Bible, and, the Bible was talking about, there being God coming to earth through Jesus and having a ministry of reconciliation. And I don't know, just reading the Bible and reading that verse, I was like, I definitely feel convicted to talk to my parents. And when I went to college, I thought, I'm done with them. I'm not interested in them being a part of my life. So much so that in New York, we have these Pell Grants. So I was very upset that I had to have one of my parents be a co-signer. I was like, oh, they're going to have to be in my life then if I co-sign with them. Because I honestly wanted to be done with them. And then when Amona gave me that challenge and I went back and I literally had the paper that I used as my script, and I gave it to my father to read. And so I took my parents out to dinner and I gave my father this thing to read.
Oh my gosh.
And I had no idea how that was going to go. I think for the first year or so, he denied it,
Really?
But I felt like, okay, I did it, God. You wanted me to go reconcile. I reconciled good.
Right.
I did my part, whatever on them, And then it was weird. When I started that, I was looking at it as a checkbox, but then God really had me talk with my parents more, and it was a process of reconciliation, not a checkbox. And then it was weird. I noticed we were getting closer as we were talking through things from the past. And, over time, my father was very apologetic about some of those things. And I ended up being closer with him. And then, there was also, I had issues with my mom in the sense of there are lots of times where I stood up to protect her from my father, and that was not reciprocated. And so that, that hurt. It made me feel less loved. It made me feel like she didn't really care about me. And I would see her protect my younger brother from my father, but not me. So that didn't feel good.
Yeah.
But as I started to reconcile with my parents, all of a sudden I noticed my brother being angry at me. And I was like, what is happening? Like, am I just under attack from the enemy, or what is going on? And why is he upset? But I guess what I did is, in reaching out to my parents and trying to reconcile, I upset the balance of the family. And he's got his own issues with my parents. I would say that he has very different stuff going on than me, because my father was not violent towards him, just me. And my mother protected him and not me. But he's got his own issues with my parents. And what happened is that with me being closer to my parents, it felt like I was pushing him out further, because he was still kind of out there. And it was interesting then for me to talk to him and compare to him some of the experiences that we had growing up, because I was kind of like always with my father and he was always with my mom. I was kind of jealous of that, and he was kind of jealous of me, but he didn't know that I was getting, beat or whatever. So maybe he was too young. I don't know. But I mean, my father did change at 5, so I'm sure he doesn't have super clear memories of like 3 and before.
Yeah. Okay, so I had some questions.
Yeah, sure.
So your dad became a Christian when you were 5.
Yeah.
And then did your mom also convert at the same time?
Yes, she also converted around the same time. So when I was growing up, I haven't heard many other people have this dynamic, but like we were all kind of like learning the Bible and learning how to be Christians as a family. And it was a very kind of unique experience. And like there are lots of times where, I would search out scripture and like challenge my parents, and they're like, oh, I didn't know that verse. And so like there was also a sense of good faith in that, as we were all like trying to learn and adjust and be more Christ-like together. And so that was very cool and very helpful. But I guess one of the other things that happened that I did not expect is that I had always envisioned that, I wanted to get married and have a family and have kids and create a type of environment for them that was different than the kind of environment that I grew up in. And I thought maybe that would like break an intergenerational curse. And when talking to my father about some of these things, then he started to go and get counseling, and then he started to think through, here's like the domestic abuse and violence that he suffered, and to kind of start working through that. And
so his dad or his mom?
His mom
was abusive towards him?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she was very physically abusive towards him. And so he started like talking to his brothers about, what do they remember from that back then. And it was very interesting to me, because like I'm thankful that the Lord was able to use me in this way, but I was also like, I didn't think that the vector would go the other direction. I didn't realize that God would kind of use my father then to kind of reach out to his brothers and to his father about, the stuff that he suffered, and to be able to start reconciling with his parents and, having those tough conversations with his brothers. And so that was kind of cool that a lot of that happened. But I think one of the things that I usually hear from people that have had those kinds of, abusive experiences is like, there's just a strong desire to want to know like why. And so, I had that desire too. I kind of was asking my father and my mom why they kind of treated me the way that they did. And I did not get the answers that I wanted. I don't know if asking why actually helps, but it seems to be a common thing. But I did. I was like, hey, why did you treat me this way? Like, why were you violent towards me and not towards my brother? And so I didn't even know how to process his answer, because his answer to me was Chad, everything that I hate about myself, I see in you. And so he wanted to like beat it out of me or whatever. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of what was going through his mind. And so that was a rough answer because I don't even know what to do with that. There's not really any action to take from that. There's no real good takeaways. And I was like, well, I might as well continue to try to understand what's going on and kind of talk to my mom. And I was like, hey, why did you protect my brother and not me? And she had the opposite answer, which I didn't even know how to process either. She was like, I see nothing of myself in you. Absolutely nothing.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's some stuff to process.
Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow. Wow.
Yeah, and, I think my father has been very, he has kind of owned up to a lot of things that he's done, and he's been very apologetic and asking for forgiveness, and, I've forgiven him and those things. It's just, I think it's a little bit more complicated to know exactly how to deal with my mom, because I think her background, I think she just always wanted to have the perfect family. Ever since she was growing up, her father was literally murdered when she was 7 years old.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and her brother, he ended up having some issues in school, and they had some great new technology when he was in high school. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, like, she kind of just became an alcoholic and drunk after her husband was murdered. And so there was some issues with my mom's little brother, and so then they went to my grandmother and said, when he was in high school, and said, hey, we got some great new technology to help your son with these issues that he's going through. So at that time, that was electroshock therapy, so they like fried his brain.
Oh no.
He did not even recognize my mom, and so my mom felt abandoned by her father because he was murdered. And then she felt abandoned by her brother because, the government basically fried his brain. And her mom kind of allowed it because she was just drunk and signed some paperwork that said that they can take her brother away.
And then her mom wasn't present because she was just drunk all the time.
Yeah. And so I think that she felt abandoned by basically all the men in her life. And then I don't really know what happened for sure. This is what I make up. What I make up is maybe there was some kind of like postpartum depression for my mom after I was born. But it's kind of like just my mom and I never connected. I mean, part of it is I had a breathing issue when I was born. So there was no like, some doctors talk about having like that skin-to-skin contact or whatever. So I was separated in some bubble, them trying to work on my lungs and just kind of on my own. So I wasn't even with people when I was a baby. So all that coming back is that I think part of it was like, my mom and I just didn't connect initially. And I think even though I was a baby, she was kind of, I don't know if angry is the right word. I'm not sure what it is, but she was kind of upset that like, oh, I don't connect with you. You're just going to abandon me too, like all the other men. And then, I don't know. I mean, when I talk to counselors that I have, they kind of call the situation like emotional neglect, I guess, from my mom towards me. But I think trying to see it from her perspective, I don't know if it was like, a preemptive, like emotional abandonment thing. I can't really say.
Wow. So both of your parents came from intense trauma and really broken families.
Yeah.
And then, were trying to start their own family, and your dad abused you, and then your mom just emotionally neglected you. Y'all found Jesus when you were 5.
Yeah.
But then you mentioned when you were in college, like you wanted nothing to do with your parents.
Right. Yeah.
So even though your dad had changed, it seemed like your mom kind of stayed the same throughout. Was the trauma just so much before age 5 that you could just never forgive them? Or was there a lot of other things that happened from age 5 through college that just made you not want to be around them at all?
I mean, I think there are a couple of different ways people relate to trauma. For me, I just held on to it.
Okay.
And the attitude that I had I was just like, I will not forget what you did to me.
So it was like you knew he changed, you knew he was with Jesus now, you could see the power of Christ within him, but you were holding on to all that hurt.
And I think it was one of those things, too, where, one of the things that my parents had said about me when I was, like, in elementary school or junior high or high school, like, I didn't talk about my feelings and that and stuff like that. And that was kind of like it even became like a constant joke even. And some of it was because I'm like, well, I'm not like, you don't want to know my feelings. Like, I hate you, And so like, I didn't tell my parents that I love them either because I'm like, I hate you. Like, and so I was just really holding on to a lot of that anger and a lot of bitterness and resentment. And, I had a lot of resentment towards my mom for not protecting me. I'm like, I protected you.
Yeah.
But, I didn't really learn or understand a lot of my mom's trauma. I think I knew some of the facts, but it wasn't until like my grandmother died that I started to understand all that.
As someone who went through that intense kind of trauma, did that manifest? Like, did you, get into, were you like a bully and attacking other people, or were you like getting in trouble with the law? Did you get into drugs?
No, so I was, so first off, things definitely changed when I was 5. But like, I went to a private school when I was like in pre-nursery through 3rd grade, and I was definitely the bully there. In fact, I was the bully for a lot of kids in my grade. And when I was in like kindergarten, there was a 7th grader that was like my nemesis. I targeted him, and in the yard of school out in like recess, because it was like a pre-nursery through like 12th grade school. So I found the biggest stick I could carry. I tried to sneak up behind him, and I smacked him across the back as hard as I could.
Oh, wow.
And I would drop the stick, and I would run to a teacher, and I'd be like, teacher, he's chasing me. And then the teacher would like yell at him, and I would stand behind the teacher and like put my hands up and like stick my tongue out.
Yeah, like na 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 boo boo.
Yeah, exactly. So I did that, which incensed him. And, I was talking about that with like one of my counselors. And one of my counselors asked me, why did you choose him? Why that guy? Why did you pick that 7th grader to attack? And I was like, well, he had red hair and glasses just like my father.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, if I could take this guy down, I have a chance at taking down my father. Yeah.
Wow. So some things started to come out a little bit here and there, but you never got in any real like serious trouble.
Oh, and I guess that was the other thing is when I was talking with a counselor, they're like, oh, usually when somebody has gone through the kinds of things that you've gone through, they're like into drugs and into drinking and into all this different stuff. And I was like, no, they're like, well, that's great that you're not into that. I was like, thanks. But, I think it is one of those things where God came and he rescued me. I mean, definitely if I didn't have God in my life, I would have made very different choices. And like, I did take the Bible seriously and I was trying to do all those things. But when I started, reading some of those verses about, forgiveness and reconciliation, I just kind of became more convicted. And I think it was different where like, it was safer kind of to have those conversations once I left home.
Yeah.
And so I guess I just basically bottled up a lot of those feelings until I was in a safer place, like away from them.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah. So I mentioned being a bully in school, but even in like my neighborhood, like I didn't have a safe, real place to go when I was a kid. Like, so even if this is back in the day of latchkey kids, so parents just let kids go wherever.
Yeah.
But we were the only white people in like a neighborhood that was predominantly black. There was like one other Hispanic family, but it was a predominantly black neighborhood. And so in the neighborhood, there was some kids that did not like white people. And I remember one time where, a group of other kids were just like, oh, let's get the oppressor. And I was like, oh, who's that? And they're like, that's you. You're the white kid. You're the oppressor. And I was like, what? And so then I would have a group of other kids fighting me. And so like I had to like fight when I was at home. I had to fight when I was in the neighborhood. And then I guess I didn't have to fight at school, but I chose to fight at school.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you started entering like therapy and counseling, like what age?
That was probably like my late 20s, early 30s, I guess. I think it just had to do with a breakup that I went through. And then...
You brought things to the surface.
Yeah. And so then I was just like, I was trying to process things from the breakup. So then I started going to a counselor, and then all these other things just kind of started bubbling up.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of helped give me some perspective on kind of some of the things that I went through.
Wow. So I guess I would just love to hear your perspective on why you continue to choose Jesus time and time again, despite all the things that you've been through that are so hard, and why you've never walked away from him.
Yeah, I think when I was in high school, there were some times where I was like investigating like other things. I think the thing that for some reason was like most interesting to me was like deism, which is kind of like, in some ways it's like synthesizing all of the like religious stories around the world to try to make some kind of more objective religious-y kind of experience. But there's a lot of just personal things that I couldn't deny. Like I had seen my father change. I had seen that happen. But just the way that God has interacted with me, like I've been able to hear his voice. He's like, said things to me. He's like given me messages. He's given me visions. And so I can't deny any of those things. Like one of my best friends in high school, Garance, he was a Jewish communist, but aside from that, we were best friends. I was like, a Christian kid, and he was like,
that's funny,
very atheist. But there was one time we went on a trip together to visit Penn State University, because that's where he's going to go. So we were going there, and God just gave me a vision. And I told the other guy that was with us, that was driving, Matt, I said, hey, God has given me a vision of like cop cars on the other side of that hill. Slow down, because he was definitely speeding. So he slowed down. We went over the hill. There was like 7 cop cars lined up. And they were like, how did you know it? I was like, I didn't know. God told me. So I'm just telling you.
Wow.
And they're like, whoa. And one of the things that Garance had said to me was like both flattering and disappointing. There was one point where he had said to me, this was like after college and everything, he had said to me, he's like, Chad, you've converted me. And I was like, what? I was very excited. And he was just like, yeah. He's like, I used to be an atheist. Now I'm agnostic. And I was like, I guess that's a win, maybe.
It's inching closer.
Yeah. There was another time where my 21st birthday, I went to a club with some friends of mine. A gang was there. I was stabbed.
What?
Yeah, I was stabbed in the back by a gang. There's 11 of them that surrounded me. They dislocated my arm, and I was on the ground, and well, actually, they tried to stab me in my chest. I blocked it with my left hand, and then one of them grabbed my left hand, and they ripped my arm out of the socket, and it was kind of dislocated and kind of flopped behind my head.
Oh my gosh.
And when they went to stab me again, I just heard the voice of God say, get up now. And so I did. And like I had known God most of my life, I recognized his voice. So I got up, and as I got up, they stabbed down. And because I kind of rotated on my right arm, which was the only arm that was working, because I rotated on that, the blade bounced off of my ribs and my spine and did not puncture my lungs.
Wow.
So because God told me to get up when he did, my spine and my ribs protected my lungs, because my friends rushed me to the ER, and they said, you were millimeters away from puncturing a lung and you would drown in your own blood.
Wow.
So,
oh my goodness.
yeah. So, I mean, there was lots of little things all along. Oh, the other thing was like a friend of mine. We had some friends that lived in Pennsylvania, and we would kind of visit each other back and forth every summer. And there's one time where I saw they had a daughter that was about my age. And when I saw her one summer, like I felt God was saying to me, hey, when she goes back to Pennsylvania, she's going to get hurt. And I was just like, I didn't feel comfortable kind of sharing that information. I'm like, it sounds dumb.
Yeah.
But she went back and I didn't say anything, and she broke her collarbone, and then I felt super guilty. So I was like, all right, God, when you give me a message, I'll tell people so they don't get hurt.
Wow.
So I think there was just lots of little things where, I mean, just prayer and just my relationship with the Lord, like we would talk and he'd talk to me. And so I just think, at the time that was just too huge of a rock to lift in my mind, because like the only way I envisioned it going down was like angry, and I didn't picture it going down of that conversation with my parents. I didn't picture it going down in a way that resulted in something positive and healthy. Mm-hmm. I only imagined it being confrontational and ugly and like, I mean, it didn't surprise me at first when my father kind of denied things, but it was nice that he kind of accepted and he started getting his own counseling and getting help.
And then it caused this ripple effect of healing in the rest of your family, which is incredible.
Yeah, and that was not what I was expecting, but yeah, God was really able to, and I think that's another thing, just to kind of like distinguish the difference between Christianity and whatever you want to call this culture that we live in now. I don't know, secular humanism, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, or
the world.
the world. Yeah, is that it seems like, especially now, like if somebody does something wrong, there's no recourse. Like a lot of people are just into like defriending. People are
cancel culture.
Yeah, but people are losing the skill of reconciliation, and I think that's so one of those things where like God has it in His Word because it's powerful, and He wants a relationship with us. One of the commands that He gives us is to love one another. So He wants us to have that love for each other, for other members of His creation. He doesn't like seeing His kids fight each other, and a lot of times right now, people just are not even having the conversation. And I know because I've been guilty of that. I didn't have the conversation for many years because I didn't want to. And I can see how powerful it is to be able to say to somebody, hey, you wronged me, and for that to turn out positive. Like, it doesn't always have to turn out into a bad, negative thing. And I understand that people have fear that it can, and I thought it was only going to be negative. And you know what? It was awkward sometimes. There was some bad Christmases in there. I remember one year, like, my nieces and nephew being just like, Uncle Chad, why are you in a fight with your, with Oma and Opops? That's what they call them.
Oh, man.
And I was like, well, we've got some issues. And to be fair, I didn't understand it when my mom was fighting with her mom.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, why are you arguing with her on her deathbed? But she was upset that she signed away her brother.
Oh, wow. So you would say that things with you and your family are in a much more peaceful place now.
Yes.
That's incredible. And that just is a testament to the power of Jesus and the power that He has to heal families if we just lean into that reconciliation and that forgiveness.
Amen.
Allow him to restore what has been broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you so much, Chad, for sharing your story.
Yeah.
If you were blessed by this episode, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future testimonies. And if you want to pass on the blessing to others, please leave a review and share to your page. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.